this is a huge, sweeping, broad generalization, but the only good records made by white people in the last 50 years have been inspired by dark blues songs. I mean, whether it's the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin or the Bad Seeds. I mean, there's something about the simplicity and the honesty and the sexuality and the darkness of whether it's John Lee Hooker or Lightnin' Hopkins, these old traditional blues that have inspired, people like the Bad Seeds to make great records.
The whole idea of Firstborn is Dead was ostensibly to make a blues album, inverted commas, and this was done with full knowledge that we weren't really capable of making a traditional blues album, so it was going to come out as something quite different from the outset. But just to try and enter that world.
It was really the first time that he'd seriously approached that whole blues aesthetic and made some strange and fucked up version of it himself.
He was trying to work out his personal relationship to Americana, maybe to let's say the blues, or let's say to some early Black American music.
In the Manchester tradition, we had a way of sort of shunning tradition. So therefore, if you came up with an idea that was sort of had been baked in the blues, then you would want to disguise it pretty fast.
Dylan, in exactly the same way, whilst being heralded as a kind of priest of counterculture, was secretly a huge fan of what Grail Marcus went on to call the old weird America. He was absolutely steeped in folk song, in country music, in the old kind of standards that you'd have thought listening to Blonde on Blonde had just been blasted out of the water forever.
Anyone who's like real about what they're doing, they're going to get that thing, and because it is the bottom of music. It's what all the modern music anyway is made out of. It's like, so a lot of bands come and they play this kind of music. They've never heard of these guys. They never know where this music come from. And it's almost like they don't got the basement of their building.
The notion of the blues in this, as the Bad Seeds sort of interpret it, is really incredible. Just having never heard anything like that, any sort of interpretation like that, and still to this day, nothing like that. Just completely different from any sort of, Stevie Ray Vaughan bullshit or whatever. But really just taking almost the essence of the blues, and just distilling it to its purest form.
When we were discussing making that album, and there's this idea, let's make a blues album, this thing about the kind of blues aspects, and to me the strength of the blues is about its kind of atmospheres, and must have been an obvious decision to go back to Hansa and record that album there.
They asked me if I wanted to go out to Berlin to make the next record, and again it was like, wow, this is chance of a lifetime. I mean, at that time Berlin, it's like the last outpost for the West, and had this sort of very romantic and yet very in the Cold War sort of feel to it.
Around that place, you could still feel the devastation of that great war, and just a lot of very bad vibes in a way that made room for great new creations.
The sound of that studio is all over The Firstborn is Dead. That's how that room, so that when you hear all that sound, the atmosphere around those songs, it's the sound of that room.
What is that? That's an old Nazi ballroom, basically. That's a huge old room with one hell of a live sound. And that's the live sound you're hearing on Bowie's vocals on Heroes and stuff like that, some of the Iggy recordings.
I started, I guess, collecting Bad Seeds material and Birthday Party material probably in Birthday Party in 82. And became quite an obsessive collector. I'm quite an obsessive collector of things.
When I first knew Andrew, he had a lot of, I guess, live things, cuttings, just lots of bits and pieces that he'd have collated from here. They're everywhere.
You know, my then girlfriend visited a record shop in Exeter.
And over the speakers came this fantastic song. And I listened to it a while and I quite liked it. And then I realised, almost to my horror, that this was Nick Cave. And I had to go home to Andrew and tell him.
Up until that point in time, she actually banned me from listening to the birthday party and the bad seeds in our apartment. So it was that decision, which I must say was a wise decision on her point, triggered me to offer her a marriage proposal.
And you kind of wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't have converted? Would we be here today?
So after 22 years of marriage, the song Tupelo had, I guess, great emotional value. So when I see the Bad Seeds play that now, it's kind of, I listen to it with a big smile, because I probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Tupelo.
He plays that a lot live, and it's the one that starts off with an amazing thunderstorm, and then it just builds up.
The bass has this sort of driving, repetitive, rhythmic feel to it, which is what good bass playing should be.
Barry Adamson had done this bass line for Saint Huck on From Her to Eternity, and I don't know what part of Tupelo Nick had, but our instruction was to basically go out there and to create some kind of bass line and undertow that was similar to Saint Huck. And some reason I ended up on the bass and Barry was on the drum. I don't know why that was.
I was playing a sort of my interpretation of the thunder, I think, coming over the song, you know, to begin Tupelo and setting the scene that way. So he inverted St. Huck. So we were back in a similar, on similar ground, but working things in another way altogether.
Instead of it went, which was the Tupelo bass line, and ended up to be the Tupelo bass line. But it was just some, as these things happen, it was just them playing around.
Musically, his roots are interesting and convoluted and thoroughly inbred. But for all the elements of Southern Gothic, or he sort of became a poster boy for what emerged as goth later on. But I think that one of the human elements he brings as an artist is that he really has a sense of the folkloric, that you get a sense of the oral tradition.
The narrative of Tupelo seems to be built around the birth of Elvis in Tupelo, but it also could be the birth of Christ.
I loved that fusion of the Presley myth with the flood story, and I think I might have even been aware that. I think I might have already been aware that Nick was doing two lots of writing at the same time. That this was exposing part of the background to the novel that was a long time coming yet, but that he was already working on.
It's almost like taking the emotion of the thing inside out and sort of cross-pollinating it across a whole range of different things. So it's about one thing, and then it's about another thing, then it's about, and let's not forget the flood.
It's about this giant flood and this, colossal storm when Elvis is being born. And it's drawing on John Lee Hooker's song from 1959, Tupelo Blues. But it's just sort of using the weather as something, saying, hey, look, something really cataclysmic is happening.
Got to remember that Elvis was not a particularly hip figure at that stage. He was 7 years dead, and it was 7 years after punk. You can remember when he died in the middle of punk, a lot of people laughed.
But it's also a biblical reference. Firstborn is dead, isn't it? Because that's what Herod basically ordered when he was trying to kill off what was it, Moses?
Yeah, if you're really looking for a great song, go to the Bible. I mean, everyone's done it, from Dylan to Leonard Cohen to Nick Cave to Michael Jackson. Earth Song is biblical references. So you can't go wrong with the Bible.
You know, it's like a mythical record, you know. And I guess, you know, it's just, I love it.
The whole deep blues thing and the development of that, I guess, biblical language was, I think, a way of kind of distancing himself from everything else that was going on around him, but actually, you know, it gave him a voice to be able to express, you know, things that were contemporary and that were going on around him.
When Nick was living in Berlin, he was one of the people that, no matter how, you know, much fun and excesses we all had, he was constantly working and working really hard in an atmosphere where there was not a lot of discipline, really. He was, no matter what, one of the more disciplined people. And really like developing something, a world of its own in his head, with his writing.
The German philosopher Alexander Kluge says that telling stories by cross-mapping is a very modern way of telling a story. Cross-mapping means, in Alexander Kluge's sense, that you, for example, travel a forest with the map of London City. So you draw from things you know and that are real and that are from our world, but you cross map it with fictional, powerful ideas. And I think that's exactly what Nick Cave had done on the whole album and all the 8 songs that are on it. It's in this way probably a conceptual album.
He's not a kind of a light or simple person when it comes to writing. He's a very highly developed literary artist already. He spent obviously a lot of time, and from very early on, developing the craft of writing novels, you know, and stories. I think he's a great storyteller.
Maybe it was easier for Nick Cave to complete an album made of 8 songs that all took place in the land that the Ass or the Angel describes, rather than finishing the novel in time.
Oddly, I've always thought of Nick more of as an author than as a sort of songwriter, because it's that Southern Gothic, but a specific place in Southern Gothic literature.
Tupelo kicks the record off, and it's a great song. But, you know, I think I was aiming to be a little more, you know, the single's a song that everyone's kind of going to go towards, and that's a song that the DJs are going to play. And I went deep into the record and hit song number 2.
At that point, you could see the sort of literary aspirations in Cave's work were maybe closer to the music. So there was a sense that, I mean, that song to me, it feels slightly inspired by Nabokov, who's a writer that Cave has talked about being influenced by and having a lot of fondness for. But you can feel him sort of working out different ideas, and I mean, it's such a curious song.
What drew me to Say Goodbye to the Little Girl Tree, you know, was just like the minimalism of it. It's just like the spare kind of hi-hat thing and this little guitar figure.
The way they arranged what instruments they chose to put on them, it really showed, like, it was really kind of visionary, I thought. Particularly, you know, the earlier albums, like hardly having any guitar, it would seem, or if it was guitar, you didn't really know what it was doing. And, you know, which at the time was so kind of at odds with what was going on.
That was like a chain reaction where also other people have to react differently or play differently to somebody playing guitar like Blixer did.
For me, as a left-handed person that plays the guitar like a right-handed person, was also meant very much that I played slide. I think that's probably the reason why I started playing slide with the Bad Seeds and never stopped doing that.
When I started playing guitar, it was like all I listened to and all I played was metal. So, it was just all about playing really fast and just shredding and, technique and sort of things. But I guess, I was probably like 15 or 16 when I first heard the Bad Seeds, and, especially what Blixa was doing with sort of non-playing and different tunings and slide guitar. It just, sort of like a wake-up call, like, oh, of course, there's a lot more that the instrument can do.
Well, Blixa, of course, was, brought in a really interesting wild card element, which I like the abrasive edge that could bring in when he decided to pull out his chops and his skrunks.
It's always good to have a unique guitar player as your guitar player.
The band, I thought, really, I don't know, they obviously came together. For me, the early albums just don't I just don't get them. But I guess once Blixa joined, for some reason, some inexplicable reason as well, because I could never really figure out what Blixa was doing. That as a band, as a sound, as a tool for Nick's lyrics, I thought they were just, they were on fire. It was fantastic. They were unbeatable, really, really superb. And they're great still. They're really, really good.
It seemed like such a kind of vital kind of group of people doing something and really sort of doggedly determined and really like focused and as an onlooker that was just so kind of really so inspiring and encouraging, I guess. I certainly had never even in my wildest dreams would have thought that I would one day be involved in it. But it was just so kind of fantastic to see the way that they would go into different areas and just really fearlessly.
We weren't aiming. I think we succeeded better than we expected to with that record, because it actually did achieve what we were trying to achieve, which was to not actually make a blues record, to make an album that had certain atmospheres and the intention and the feel of blues without having any of the genre trappings of that type of music, or not being dependent on the trappings of that music. The easy kind of 12-bar structures or the sevenths or the blues scale and doing guitar solo and all these sorts of things. I don't think any of the songs have any of those musical structures in them.
In some respects, it went right against the grain of the way that people were recording at that time, which was very clinical, very dry, very precise, quite synthetic.
It doesn't seem like a record that was like, hey, this is an 80s record by any means. It doesn't have 80s production. It doesn't have 80s style songs. It was, in a sense, Firstborn is Dead as a timeless sounding record.
In the mid-'80s, there was a canon, and it was the Beatles, and it was the Stooges, and it was the Velvet Underground, and it was noise music, and it was punk rock, and that lineage was established, and it was you had to have those records, and you had to know about them, and they were good, and they were fine. It's not a problem. But Nick Cave, whilst clearly knowing about those records, just subtly kind of created a completely alternative universe of inspiration.
That was part of being there. That's what I was there for. It was like, listening to the pop group and the early birthday and getting that sort of like, two fingers up to everything, feeling with what you were doing and the kind of art that you were trying to carve out and the kind of expression that you were getting at and communicate and just, as well as sort of watching an artist develop themselves in the way Nick was developing himself.
Nick at the time had a real bad uphill struggle against the Goths because they were trying to make him to be like a male Susie
In terms of popular culture and what that word means in a music, you know, as a rock performer, it's so inadequate when it comes to Nick.
It was beyond goth. I mean, goth was a trend to me, like new romantic, you know, just slap on some black makeup. So Nick he did Black Crow King almost. It was like another blues thing, but it was almost like saying, yeah, I am the Black Crow King. I'm beyond all you guys walking around listening to your Cure records. You know,
this is what I like in Nick's work, is that there's a humor to it as well, along with the sadness and the darkness, which is, you know, can be all encompassing, but it's funny because there's a humor to his work, as far as I'm concerned, that isn't there with like Nick Drake. It just isn't. It's just, or even Elliott Smith. It's just, oh God, it's awful. Whereas, you know what? It's awful, but there's still humor in it. You have to find humor. You have to be able to laugh. Otherwise, what's the fucking point?
I'm, you know, a lyric head. I mean, that to me, you know, although I do appreciate and love music and I'm emotionally moved by the music, the lyrics are what really call out to me. And, you know, I study them and, you know, dissect them and things like that. And I'm really in awe, and you know, in terms of his contemporaries, I think Nick stands head and shoulders above, you know, the people of his era.
It's one of the reasons why Nick Cave was such a kind of important artist for me as a teenager, is because he was the portal through which you discovered so much.
He had read a lot of prison literature, and he'd read In the Belly of the Beast, and that stuff. Kind of, I noticed he kind of channeled, because he was so always working and had incredible sort of output of work.
Knocking on Joe is something that Nick couldn't really have written, I don't think, earlier. You know, it's too melodic, it's too heartfelt.
There's just something about the architecture of that song. It's as if the music hangs from the words, and the words are nailed. That break, the Nancy's body, those hiatuses. To hear the early Bad Seed stuff used to take my breath away, because it left space. It would leave drama. It would leave holes. It would leave these great gaping holes, and then it would fill them with this vivid, inky lyric that you know was such an immediate and intoxicating image.
I was always fascinated by the way that song moved from being unbearably sparse, like nothing seeming to happen between beats or between bars, to this kind of rolling climax.
It used to puzzle me. How am I being utterly moved and engaged with a song about a prisoner who's, you know, kind of self-mutilating as a way of as his only means of escape? But it's a bigger metaphor, isn't it? It's so beautifully written and so beautifully structured. You're engaged. It's not about empathy. It's about feeling. It's just about an immediacy of feeling.
You know, it just sort of lands on you like if you were taking niacin and, you know, you get flushed, you know, or anything that opens up your capillaries. It's like sort of all of a sudden you realize that they're playing a level higher than they were a second ago.
It just seemed like a sort of magic trick every time I heard it. How did they get from almost silence to something that was like a crescendo?
Nick's music's inherently haunted. I think that so much of his creative impulses come out of basically a way of keeping the demonology at bay. So he's somebody where I think inherently the lights kind of go down a bit in the room when he starts looking at it, and the shadows lurk, and you get some sort of mystical queasy feeling invested into into whatever his pen or his tongue caresses.
You know, he grew up in outback Australia and Melbourne, and never been to the South. So he kind of takes these influences and appropriates them.
You know, Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, Carson McCullers, these kind of people that really influenced him and his writing. And I think it just like, it was definitely a step up into a new level lyrically at that time that was necessary, that he was forced to be doing in his in his career as an artist. And I think it was basically like the literary evolution of his work, that that an outfit like the birthday party just couldn't suit anymore.
Nick's Deep South fixation, which was already running rampant ever since Swampland, he was writing his book. I got well into the blues. It made me, and I'll always thank Nick for this, made me investigate gospel music and blues.
So you start investigating this stuff, and it becomes like a trail for you to investigate as like, a fan or whatever. You start thinking, well, who is this blues person and why is this important? And you start, going out and buying other records and investigating other things. So I think that for me, that second album really did that. It set you on that path.
One of the things that made The Firstborn is Dead such a really fascinating artifact to me as a teenager was the sleeve notes, which were written, I don't know by whom, because I actually checked, and there's not a credit on the vinyl version anyway of who wrote the sleeve notes. So I'm hoping they were written by Nick, but I don't know. But they were written in a kind of style that I've subsequently come to recognize as being the kind of thing you get on jazz liner notes, faintly reverential and using a slightly kind of detached, sort of almost paternal tone.
Almost like you get on a Folkways record or something like that. I think it was kind of very much an exercise in Americana and almost a bit too, going a bit too far in that way, to the point of being a bit hokey.
And there's a great line about Wanted Man, which tells the story of how it was a Dylan song which Dylan wrote for Cash, and that nobody could quite remember the words. Although actually I've checked subsequently, and he gets most of the words pretty much right. I didn't hear the Cash version for years though. Anyway, it tells the story of how the song came to be recorded. Makes it sound deliciously casual, as if they were just mucking about one day and they came up with the idea.
Nick came in one day and said, I want to do a Bob Dylan song. And he sung the couple of verses that were of the original and said, I think the chord changes go la, 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 la. So Mick played along, or somebody played along, and they sang it, and he put down the basic guide. But then he went away and wrote about another 25 verses.
That I really, really loved, because Cave completely rewrote that, and the lyrics were just totally outrageous. And if you listen to the Johnny Cash original, which is on San Quentin live album, it's fairly tame, and then Nick's version, he just takes it and twirls it around and kicks it and throws it out the window and picks it up again and twirls it around some more. I mean, this is the wild song, just relentless.
And I can remember struggling for about 18 hours, just trying to get all the elements to gel. And I remember Mick coming in, and I was pulling my hair out. And Mick went, oh, sounds really good. But all we need to do is just cut a load of stuff out and then gradually add it in as it goes along. And so we started doing that. And as we started doing it, so more and more people from the band who've been sitting around getting bored of going out, coming back, here's still the track going around, and me getting more and more riled, suddenly started to hear it coming together. And I just remember the final mix, there was everybody in the band was doing something. I think Nick was like putting reverb on his harmonica. Just everybody had something to do. And it was one of those things where the final mix became like a total performance, unrepeatable, like a great gig.
An artist is great when they can do great covers. And I think Nick does great covers. I think, Bob is a master at doing covers.
It's kind of like he took ownership of that song. It's a hard thing to do, especially if a song's written by Bob Dylan and kind of made real by Johnny Cash,
I would love to hear Nick do a cover of something like Sooner or Later, One of Us Must Know from the Blonde on Blonde era. I mean, that would be, I think, an amazing kind of thing to hear because, they both can sing those bittersweet love songs so great.
It's certain artists or certain people, creators of any kind of expression, kind of distill their influences in a way that's becomes, of course, some who also learn and studied for themselves, self-taught themselves so much because they had such a desire and such a love to learn everything and to use everything through their own focus, to let everything kind of go through their own filtering system and grow with it, and then not to replicate necessarily. So when Nick made the album of blues, like the second album, it's again, it's not to necessarily to shine a light directly on the blues itself, but to have the blues form or the blues, whatever the blues means to him, like it's just a very subjective thing.
Talking about the Firstborn is Dead, I was listening to a lot of country blues, namely Fred McDowell and John Lee Hooker, Lightnin' Hopkins, Son House, Blind Willie Johnson, Blind Willie McTell, all the Blind Willies.
And you don't got to know every specific blues artist, man. I don't even know half of them, You just got to understand that that's where music come from. And these guys bled when they played. And if you can combine them kind of things and whatever kind of music you're doing, you're going to be, as authentic as you can ever be. And that's all anyone can hope to be, is to be able to be like honest when they play.
And yeah, I guess the key thing is it was real. And I could never really look at, the Bunny when Teardrop Explodes, the Smiths as kind of as real.
There were moments in there where, you could feel, you could smell what was going on. And it comes out of the record. It sort of bleeds out of every pore of the record in a most kind of powerful way.
It's your life experience combined with that feeling of where the blues come from and all the bottom of music, then I guess if you want to call it authentic, then you authentic because you have opened yourself up to the real thing. And that's all of us are trying to do, like if you have any intention of like talking the talk and walking the walk, all you're trying to do is open yourself up so that the music come out of you properly,
I would let those songs reverberate through me in almost a kind of chaotic self-destructive way. And at the same time, I recognized that what was going on was just an incredible, possibly, piece of work that had never been done before by its sort of regurgitation through this historical place.
There is one song that allows me to travel through time. It's called Blind Lemon Jefferson.
The music itself captures the mood of the lyrics. It's summed up by this kind of slow, rhythmic drive, and it's also the sense that the bass is really coming to the forward in the kind of the Bad Seeds sound, and bass is hugely important on the Bad Seeds records.
Blind Lemon Jefferson really revolved around Barry's bass line.
And I'd played this quivering bass that was throbbing from the inside out. And I walked in the studio and the loudest thing in the track was this, wobbling sort of bass line, which made the thing sort of like just sort of hover.
I don't know what the effect is called, but like a whoom.
Part of the bass sound on that, I remember, is like the actual bass, but then the sound of the room, like captured from like 30 feet away and really over exaggerated. So the bass just feels as though it's just coming from everywhere, as if you're standing in the room next to the bass player and you're being enveloped by the bass.
and I tried to play it like, bass is a bit loud, don't you think? But I knew that those were the elements that were making things work really well.
You really get a sense of this kind of momentum, but it's a slow, painful momentum, like this old guy with his, as he says in the song, tap, tap, tapping with his cane.
Even when he starts singing, it's like Blind Lemon Jefferson. Is it come in? Tap. It's just space.
Basically, I'm playing slide guitar like I'm trying to play minimalist music. I'm not doing much.
I just couldn't believe that there was anyone who had such a great sense for atmosphere. And I've always thought that when I heard Blind Lemon Jefferson, which I did, I went out and bought the some rubbish compilation and listened to those recordings, which of course were made, musicologists will correct me, I'm sure, but either in the late 1920s, maybe the early 30s, but really a long time ago. They have that quality of static because they were recorded by him shouting into a big horn and a needle etching it onto something made out of wax.
This music builds on a treasure chest of songs that have been written by others, and that Nick Cave is just carrying the torch, but just in a very positive sense. He took the torch.
That song has that quality, that absolute quality of like having existed in some pre-modern period and just kind of been parachuted down a time tunnel to land on this record.
And you could just feel it. It's like you knew that they knew, not in an arrogant way, but in a realistic way, that they were doing something nobody else was doing, and that's what makes for great bands, not necessarily great albums or tours, but in this case, yes, but great bands become great when they are trying to do something that they don't see anybody else doing, and that's really, there was nobody anywhere near their league at the time.
Being in Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds was the first place where, it was almost, a given thing that you had to get inside and sort of put the thing like poof, on the table and go, there it is. There was no sort of, there was sort of disguised kind of pussyfooting, if you like. But really what was going on is that like people were in there bearing their stuff like, until it hurt to get this thing out. And so you are literally inside what's going on.
I go when no man before me bothered to go, till the soles of my shoes are shot full of holes, and it's all downhill with a bullet. This rambling and roving is taking its course. I'm grazing with the dinosaurs and the dear old horses, and the city streets crack and a great hole forces me down. My soapbox, my pulpit, the theater ceiling, the silver star spangled, and the coins in my pocket go jingle.